Hello, everyone. I'm Veena Aiyer, founder and CEO of QRKIEZ, a platform for neurodivergent individual families and allies to connect. Please check us out as www.quirkies.com. Today, we have a special guest, Dan Kram. Dan is a seasoned engineer and also a neurodivergent advocate. Welcome, Dan. Thanks for joining us.
Thank you. I'm very excited about being here.
We are excited too. So, Dan, your LinkedIn profile says that you are a neurodivergent advocate. Can you explain a little bit more about it? Do you provide advocacy services to neurodivergent folks? And are you yourself neurodivergent?
I don't currently provide services. I am myself neurodivergent. I have ADHD, and how I see myself as an advocate is specifically in the workplace for now. I want to reduce stigma around neurodivergence, and part of that was establishing an ERG at my previous company. I felt like neurodivergent voices weren't really being heard, especially around live events and events where we might come together as a company, where the expectation is everyone is an extrovert and very social, and especially with the neurodivergent community, that's often not the case. So I wanted to make sure that they felt like they had a safe space, but also to gather feedback and bring it to leadership so that we could improve the experience for neurodivergent folks going forward.
That's so awesome. So, did you find that your employer was supportive of this ERG group and did you see any positive changes?
Very much so. They were very supportive, and actually, when I came to them proposing the ERG, it was something they had kind of been thinking about, but didn't really have the bandwidth. So I offered to take that on as far as establishing a group. I do find that there were some changes as far as the way that the company tried to make sure that neurodivergent people and other people who might have not been part of the planning previously were allowed to be so for future events. So that was a big deal for me. I didn't get to see the full fruits of the labor, as far as I had already left the company before they had a full live event, but I think that there was a lot of promising changes on the horizon.
That's awesome. And we are hearing about a lot of employers coming up with these inclusive practices and trying to have more accommodation. So
Mhm,
you are an engineer, so you are in tech field. So
mhm.
your experience, like, do you feel enough work has been done? People are becoming more neuroaffirming, or they are people have accommodations in place, or do you feel a lot of work needs to be done on that front?
I definitely think there can always be more work that can be done. I do find that workplaces are more accepting of neurodivergence, especially in a remote environment
Hmm.
where I think it's important to have face-to-face time, but at the same time, there may be people who that's less comfortable for them.
Hmm.
And so I never hold it against people to have their cameras off in a meeting per se. And I think that especially something I've noticed going into interviews for companies, there's been a lot more companies that have asked if I needed accommodations ahead of time, and or, for example, timed assessments, asking for more time and not getting any pushback on that.
Wow.
I do think that that's definitely a difference that I've noticed. I feel like they were not as accommodating previously, and I've been doing this for almost 20 years, so I think it's definitely evolved quite a bit over then. But I do think that the majority of companies aren't necessarily in that mindset.
Yeah.
So I think that's where the advocacy work still needs to be done, is I'd like to see that be very common practice in the same way that companies more often than not now ask you what verbiage you want to use for your uh like titles, as far as like him and her and things like that. So I think that definitely companies are starting to fall in line around that, but it's part of us just giving a voice to those folks, especially when a lot of them feel uncomfortable speaking their voice.
That's true. And you touched a great point. There are some companies who are providing those accommodation and becoming, frontier of this movement, but obviously majority of the companies is not there yet. So as someone who has so much experience, especially in tech field and corporate world, what advice would you give to a younger neurodivergent person who is, in that transitioning phase? They're just entering the workforce, entering the corporate world. So how do you suggest that they should stand up for themselves and ask for some of these accommodations?
I mean, that's really just it is try to be comfortable with yourself and understanding that your brain, although not in a bad way, it does operate differently than non-neurodivergent people. And I think it's really important to not feel afraid to talk to your supervisors or say in an interview, here's what I need, because there are laws that force employers to accommodate you,
Hmm.
even if some don't go out of their way to ask if you need accommodations. So always be comfortable. And then if you're in a engineering setting, when you're actually in the job, don't be afraid to say, hey, I'm having trouble organizing my thoughts on this. Could you walk me through it or pair with me? I find that to be a very valuable resource. And I think that most of the time people are very willing to help you out. And as a manager in the past, I've done that for my employees, is work with them, make sure that they have techniques to organize themselves as they do their work.
That's a great point. And anybody's listening, I think this is a great tip. There are laws in place, so you can ask for it, even if your employer is not forthcoming and providing
Mhm.
you. Definitely go ask for it, have that conversation. And you never know, like people are not bad. If you really ask for help and for support, more often than not, they would be willing to do that. So I think that's a great tip for a lot of folks. Now, shifting gear a little bit and talking more about you, you are an engineer and a product manager. So, did your neurodivergent had a role to play in your choice of career?
I think it probably did. I've always really been attracted to problem solving and puzzles and things of that nature. So engineering is definitely that. It's a lot of problem solving, a lot of kind of putting pieces together. I've always enjoyed math, although math, contrary to popular belief, math is not as important in the engineering field as one might think. But I do enjoy calculations and things like that. And I started by taking apart computers and putting them back together, although sometimes they didn't work afterwards. But I've always enjoyed that kind of process. Definitely, I do think that played a heavy role in my career choice. And I feel like people now have more ability to kind of be themselves in that role, as opposed to, I did feel a lot more stigma around it when I first started my career. And so although I naturally gravitated towards it was a little bit scary to jump into that field, as a lot of STEM fields, because it requires a lot of focus and organizational skills and things that I don't have and had to learn kind of on the job, as it were, and some techniques that I brought from school, but it definitely was an adjustment for sure.
That's interesting. And did you mention you like as a child you got to know your neurodivergent or as an adult?
So I was diagnosed when I was around 8,
Okay.
and I recognize that that is not the norm for a lot of people these days. A lot of people are diagnosed as adults. So I definitely have that perspective of having grown up with it. And luckily, I had a family and a mother who was very interested to learn about neurodivergence and ADHD specifically, and helped. get accommodations at my school when some were not yet available, and actually like forced some of my teachers at different points to go through sensitivity training around children who were
Oh,
neurodivergent. So yeah, I mean, I think that I was very lucky in that
right.
way. I think that there's probably a lot of people who identify now as neurodivergent but had no idea what they were growing up and didn't really understand that. And all I can hope now is that we bring more awareness to that and that more people understand what they are earlier and are able to get the help they need so that it's, a lot of people have trouble getting into the fields that they want to get into because they don't realize they're neurodivergent and realize that there's techniques they can use to allow them to assimilate better.
That's awesome. And that's a great point. Kudos to your mom, because more and more, what I've heard is when you have a parent or a family member who really advocates for a kid when they're younger, that helps them
Hmm.
build confidence, build them, gets them
Hmm.
the support so that they could, in a later point, have a successful career of their choice. So, anybody who's listening, if parents are listening, you as a parent can work with the school districts, can work with the school to make sure your kid gets the accommodation and make sure that you're building that confidence in your kid because there's nothing they cannot do. Obviously, you need techniques and you need some strategies and tools, but it's possible. So I think that's the
Yeah.
whole idea that we want to promote when we're talking about awareness, like it is possible. I
Hmm.
mean, every human has deficits and strengths. So can we talk about some of your strengths, Dan? Because you did mention that you have to work on your organization skill and focus, but what are your strengths that really helped you be successful and have such a long career in engineering?
Sure. And one thing I want to say on the point that you just made is that I think confidence is key. And part of that is knowing that there's nothing wrong with you
Yes,
and that you're different but not wrong. And the reason why it feels wrong is because we have to force ourselves into the box of a non-neurodivergent majority society. And so that's where the uneasiness comes from, not because you're incapable.
that's true. Like there's a saying, right? Trying to put a round peg in a square
Hmm.
box. So I think that's
Hmm.
what people are trying to do. So that you're spot on. It's not the inability; it's just understanding the uniqueness and the strengths that every neurodivergent person is going to be unique. What they bring and how you can help them be successful using their strengths. So you're right.
Yeah. Yeah.
So yeah,
And
so about your strengths because I'm
yeah,
sure
sure,
there
of
are
course.
plenty.
Yeah. I mean, I would say one of the biggest strengths, and I do attribute this to being neurodivergent, is I think outside of the box a lot.
Mhm.
And what I mean is, like, let's say I'm working on an engineering issue, I'm going to think about a lot of different scenarios and a lot of different ways of engineering it. I think that the other end of that becomes problematic is I have all these ideas floating around, and oftentimes it's hard to kind of funnel it down and to organize it in a logical way. But definitely my creativity is helpful, and I wanted to be a writer for a long time, and so I think that that does inform the way that I approach problems. Um, I think that um, I'm very empathetic, and I don't know if that's directly because of my neurodivergence. Um, and um, sorry, I don't know if you can hear the dogs barking in the background.
No, no, all
Okay,
good.
okay. Um, and I think that so another bad thing about neurodivergence is losing your train of thought. Um, but I think that being empathetic partially comes from me having to deal with being neurodivergent most of my life and feeling that otherness and understanding that other people may have unseen difficulties than what they present.
That's true.
So I try to be very understanding of people's situations, and especially as a manager, I try to be very understanding of depression and anxiety and all of those things that come with being neurodivergent. And if an employee says, today I'm just not feeling it. I don't really ask for specific explanation. I just say, mental health is really important, just as much as being physically sick. And I also having Slack channels around like the neurodivergent ERG, or even if you don't have an ERG, like creating a Slack channel for folks who can talk about, hey, I'm pretty in a bad place right now, and having other people kind of support them. And that was some of the things that I saw come out of that. That was really, really great. Um, so empathy definitely. And I would say that I also have a certain determination because I know that I have to work extra hard to fit within that box of a non-neurodivergent society, and had to learn a lot of those lessons the hard way in school because school, especially at the time that I was growing up, and still I think some schools struggle with that. But it was ADHD was not as common as it is now. And I think that neurodivergence wasn't even really a phrase at the time. And so it was just something where people were just starting to kind of figure out what it means and how to deal with it. So I had to kind of develop that ethic of getting things done as best as I could and really, really working hard and to prove that I can do it despite the hurdles that I had to overcome. And yeah, I would say those are the three main things that kind of I bring with me as a neurodivergent person that other people may have not had that similar experience.
And that's awesome. You're talking about resilience, you're talking about the determination. And the best thing you touched upon is building your small support group, your community within the workplace, like Slack channels. Like even if you don't have an ERG or a dedicated resource, you're creating those things
Hmm.
where people are. And I think that's the grassroots way of building awareness because mental health, like today, thankfully, people are more aware of it and talking about it. So it's definitely being comfortable about it, owning it, and being open to sharing that is going to help bridge that gap and that people are becoming more and more aware about these unseen differences.
Yeah, definitely.
So, shifting gear a little bit, you spoke a lot about your professional experience. How has your neurodivergence, if at all, impacted or influenced your personal relationships?
Yeah, I mean that's definitely a tricky one, and I'm pretty open about it. But you know, having any type of personal relationship, whether it's marriage or friendships, being neurodiver being neurodivergent definitely plays a big role. Um, I'm often forgetful. Um, I can sometimes I do things not 100%. I do it halfway, and then I get distracted and move on. And when you're living with someone or in a roommate situation, that is not always ideal and requires a lot of discussions about kind of where I can work on myself or kind of meet my partner or roommates halfway. I think that with friendships, similarly, someone might text you and you might see the text and just not like respond to it or forget that they sent you something, and you don't want to make people feel as though they're unimportant or that you don't care
Yeah.
about them. So that's something I also have to be careful about. Um, I think that one thing that I do enjoy is in my relationships is humor. And I think that I'm able to make a lot of, as a person with ADHD, I can make a lot of quick connections around things that I find humorous. And I think that that definitely helps, make people enjoy being around me. But definitely there's some struggles and also being organized. And also, I would say, as a parent of two kids, that also becomes especially important to kind of focus and organize and have forethought about things. And that's not always easy for me to do, um, or forgetting things here and there. So there's a lot of chaos, and being neurodivergent on top of that makes things difficult for sure.
That's interesting. you do talk about humor and some of the struggles. So, uh, acceptance, I mean, as you spoke
Mhm.
about professional life, even personal life, if your partner or your friends, they know about any whatever, they know like these are certain things you struggle with, not necessarily because you don't care about them, but you forget or you get distracted. So, like, have they come up with some tools or some strategies for you? I think that also affects a lot, right? Who are you with? The kind of right person, you have to find the right friendship or the right partner.
Hmm.
So
Hmm.
can you throw a little bit light on that?
Yeah, so some things that help with my partner and I specifically is often she'll make a list of the things that she would like me to do. So it's easy for me to remember and kind of check things off a list, or remind me a couple times. And I think speaking of acceptance, that's I think a really important part of it is for a long time, I didn't want to admit that I couldn't do the things that other people could do because at the end of the day, I am different. And I think it's really important to accept that. And I think if you're in a relationship specifically, it's really important to be open and honest about that because your partner or friends will have certain expectations of you that may be unreasonable. So there's that, but really just like organizing and really an understanding for your partner about you might have to be asked to do things two or three times before you remember. And sometimes I'll be told to do a thing, I'll walk away into another room, and then I'll get to that room not remembering why I was in that room in the first place. So, it can be very frustrating, and I think patience is really important. And also admitting that I know this is a struggle for my partner to live with and being open about that.
That's interesting what you brought up. And you spoke about patients. So I was actually hearing a renowned doctor who was talking about ADHD and said a lot of your success is going to depend on the right profession that you choose that
Hmm.
really works with your strengths and finding the right partner. That is
Right.
going to really have an immense influence on your life, which is true. I think for all of us, find the right partner can make or break your life. So
For sure.
definitely I feel for a neurodivergent person, finding an understanding companion, someone who understands their struggle and strengths, is super important.
Yeah, for
So
sure.
Dan, uh, finally, as we are like parting thoughts, if you have to give a piece of advice to your younger self
Mhm.
when you had not started your career or not met your partner, what's the advice you're going to give? Like, hey, it's going to turn out okay when you are probably struggling or stressed out about how your life is going to turn out. So let's say now you have a chance to go back and give your younger self, younger Dan, an advice. What would that be?
Yeah, I think the big thing would be it's going to be okay, and that you're going to be able to make a career for yourself and have a family despite the issues that you might be facing. But I think another really big piece of advice that I would give is you can do it, you're capable, but you shouldn't try to approach the problem the same way a non-neurodivergent person approaches that problem. You need to approach it in your own way and be okay with that.
That's so awesome. That's so cool. Thanks, Janet. Thanks for sharing your amazing journey and a lot of information that I'm pretty sure a lot of people who are listening would benefit from. So, if you want, guys, if you want to hear more such stories, please sign up for QRKIEZ newsletter. As every week, we feature blogs and interviews from neurodivergent folks and adults and allies who share their experience that I believe is going to resonate with a lot of people. Thank you so much, Dan. It was great having you. Bye.